The crew mocked him, called him Cripple Jack, and tossed his crutch overboard on his first day. But when the storm broke, that lame sailor was the only one who could save them all. The Sea Raven creaked under the weight of a merciless Atlantic sun in 1852, her salt-stained decks alive with the shouts of hardened sailors. Jack Harrow, just 22, stood at the ship's rail, his right leg twisted from a childhood fall, clutching a worn oak crutch that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He'd come aboard this merchant vessel, bound for the Caribbean with rum and spices, chasing a dream of belonging, of proving he was more than his limp. But the crew had other ideas. Their laughter cut sharper than the wind, and their eyes, cold, judging, promised a voyage of misery. Jack's first day was a gauntlet. The first mate, Caleb Vance, a bull of a man with fists like hammers and a sneer that could curdle milk, took one look at Jack's crutch and spat tobacco juice at his feet. "What's this then?" Caleb roared, his voice carrying over the snap of sails. "A gimp boy playing sailor? You'll be shark bait by sunrise." The crew howled, their jeers a chorus of cruelty. Jack's face burned, but he kept his eyes on the horizon, clutching the small leather notebook tucked inside his coat, his father's last gift, filled with cryptic notes about winds and stars. He'd learned to read the sea from those pages, a skill no one on this ship suspected. The Sea Raven was a rough ship, her timbers scarred from storms and her crew tougher than the nails holding her together. They valued strength, speed, and a stomach for rum. Jack had none of those. His leg ached with every step, his hands were soft from years ashore, and he'd never touched a drop of liquor. To them he was a joke, a liability, a target. By noon, Caleb had the crew chanting Cripple Jack, as they hauled ropes, their mocking rhythm matching the ship's sway. Jack grit his teeth, remembering his father's words, whispered years ago by a dying man, "The sea doesn't care about your leg, only your grit." But grit felt far away when Caleb grabbed Jack's crutch during a drunken hazing at dusk, twirling it like a trophy before hurling it into the churning waves below. The crew's laughter drowned out Jack's gasp as the crutch vanished, swallowed by the sea's hungry maw. He stumbled, catching himself on a barrel, his bad leg screaming under the strain. "Walk proper now, boy," Caleb taunted, his men roaring. Jack's hands balled into fists, but he stayed silent, his heart hammering with shame and fury. He wanted to scream, to fight, to prove he wasn't broken. But he was 1 against 20, a lamb among wolves. He hobbled to the lower deck, each step a knife in his pride, their jeers echoing in his ears like the toll of a funeral bell. Below deck, in the dim flicker of a lantern, Jack sat on a coil of rope, his father's notebook open in his trembling hands. The pages were worn, the ink faded, but they held secrets, patterns of clouds, shifts in the wind, the dance of stars that could guide a ship through hell itself. His father, Daniel Harrow, had been a navigator, a man who read the sea like a book until disgrace and betrayal sank him. Jack traced the words, feeling his father's ghost in every line. "You're still here, Pa," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the creak of the ship. "Tell me what to do." Outside the air was changing. Jack noticed it first, a subtle shift in the wind, a dampness that clung to his skin like a warning. The clouds on the horizon weren't just clouds anymore, they were piling up, dark and heavy like mountains ready to fall. He'd seen those shapes in his father's notes, sketches labeled storm signs. His heart quickened. He limped to the deck, scanning the sky, counting the seconds between gusts. The crew ignored him, too busy drinking and swapping crude jokes. Jack approached Caleb, his voice steady despite the pain in his leg. "Sir, the wind's turning. Clouds are stacking west. We should reef the sails." Caleb's laugh was a blade. "Listen to Cripple Jack playing weatherman. Go scrub pots, boy, before I toss you overboard next." The crew roared again, their mockery a wall Jack couldn't climb. He retreated, his cheeks burning, but the sky didn't lie. Those clouds were trouble, the kind that sank ships and drowned men who laughed too loud. He thought of warning the captain, Elias Stone, a stern man with gray eyes that saw everything but said little. Elias had watched the hazing in silence, his face unreadable as if testing Jack's mettle. Would he listen now or dismiss Jack like the others? As night fell, Jack lay in his hammock, the ship's groans mingling with the crew's snores. His leg throbbed, his crutch gone, his pride in tatters. But the air grew heavier, the ship's pitch sharper. He opened his notebook again, reading by moonlight that slipped through a porthole. His father's words stared back. "When the sea turns, only those who listen survive." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the water, low and menacing, like a beast stirring from sleep. Jack's stomach dropped. The crew might mock him, but the storm wouldn't. It was coming, and it didn't care who was lame or strong, who belonged or didn't. would test them all. If you were Jack, would you warn the crew who mocked you, or let them face the consequences of their cruelty? Tell me in the comments. The Sea Raven is about to face a storm that could break her apart, and Jack's next choice will decide whether they live or die. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see what happens next, and click the video on the screen for another tale of courage against impossible odds. The Sea Raven groaned under a sky growing darker by the hour, her sails snapping like nervous flags as the wind turned sharp and restless. Jack Harrow, still stinging from the crew's mockery and the loss of his crutch, hobbled across the deck, his father's notebook clutched tight against his chest. The clouds piling on the horizon weren't just a warning anymore, they were a promise of chaos, their edges bruised purple and heavy with rain. Jack had seen those shapes in his father's sketches, labeled Death's Herald in faded ink. At 22 he'd never faced a storm like this, but he knew it was coming and the crew's laughter wouldn't stop it. They called him Crippled Jack, tossed his crutch into the sea, but the sea didn't care about their scorn. It was about to test them all and Jack feared they'd fail. The morning after his humiliation, Jack tried again to warn the crew. He limped toward Caleb Vance, the first mate whose cruelty ruled the ship like a tyrant's fist. Caleb was barking orders, his broad shoulders blocking the sun as he loomed over a group of sailors hauling barrels. Jack's leg ached with every step, each one a reminder of his vulnerability without his crutch. He swallowed his pride, his voice steady but low. "Mr. Vance, the wind shifted again. Barometers dropping fast. We need to reef the sails now or we'll lose control when the storm hits." Caleb turned, his sneer cutting deeper than any blade. "Storm? You see ghosts in the clouds, boy. Go scrub pots in the galley before I make you swab the deck with that gimp leg of yours." The crew roared, their laughter a wall of sound that drowned Jack's protest. He stood frozen, heat rising in his cheeks, knowing the truth in his bones but powerless to make them listen. Below deck, the galley smelled of grease and stale bread. Jack slumped against a crate, his bad leg throbbing as he scrubbed pots with a rag that felt heavier than iron. The ship's pitch grew sharper, her timbers creaking like a warning. That's when Molly, the ship's cook, appeared, a wiry woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that held a lifetime of secrets. She watched Jack for a moment, her hands floured from kneading dough, then tossed him a broom handle whittled into a rough crutch. "Made it last night," she said, her voice gruff but kind. "Ain't pretty but it'll hold you up." Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't expected kindness, not here. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, gripping the makeshift crutch like a lifeline. Molly waved him off, but her eyes lingered. "I was an outcast once too. Lost my boy to the sea years back. You remind me of him, quiet but stubborn. Don't let them break you, lad." Molly's words stirred something in Jack, a flicker of hope amidst the shame. She sat across from him, peeling potatoes with a knife worn smooth by years of use. "Why'd you come aboard knowing they'd eat you alive?" she asked. Jack hesitated, his fingers tracing the notebook's leather cover. "My pa was a navigator. Taught me to read the sea before he was gone. This ship was my last chance to prove I'm worth something." Molly nodded, her eyes distant. "My boy thought the same. The sea don't care about worth, only what you do when it turns mean." Her words hung heavy, a warning and a challenge as the ship lurched under a sudden gust, sending a pot crashing to the floor. Jack's mind raced with the moral dilemma eating at him. Should he keep warning the crew, risking more ridicule and maybe worse, or stay silent and protect himself? He overheard Caleb's voice through the deck planks, low and menacing, plotting with two sailors. "That gimp's trouble. Tonight, during his watch, we'll teach him a lesson he won't forget." Jack's stomach twisted. The crew wasn't just mocking him now, they were planning something darker, something that could end with him overboard, not just his crutch. He gripped Molly's broom handle, his knuckles white, and made a choice. He'd try one last time to warn Captain Elias, the stern man who'd watched his hazing in silence. If Elias wouldn't listen, Jack would have to face the storm alone. Limping to the hold to fetch supplies, Jack stumbled across a dusty crate tucked in a corner, its lid marked with his father's initials, Ditch. His heart pounded as he pried it open, revealing a nautical chart, its edges frayed but covered in his father's precise handwriting. The chart mapped their route, but it showed something the crew didn't know, a jagged reef just miles ahead, hidden beneath the waves. Jack's father had marked it with a warning, "Storm's path, steer clear." Jack's breath caught. The storm was driving them straight toward it, and Captain Elias's outdated maps wouldn't show the danger. If they hit that reef, the Sea Raven would splinter like kindling, and every man aboard would drown. He clutched the chart, his resolve hardening. He had to get to Elias no matter the cost. But as he climbed the ladder to the deck, Caleb's shadow loomed above, his eyes glinting with malice. "Where you going, crippled Jack?" he growled, snatching the chart from Jack's hands. "Stealing from the captain now? That's mutiny." Before Jack could protest, Caleb shoved him back into the hold, slamming the hatch shut and locking it with a heavy iron bolt. "Stay there till you learn your place." Caleb's boots echoed away, leaving Jack in darkness, the chart gone, his warning unspoken. The ship lurched violently, a wave crashing against her hull like a hammer. Above, Jack heard the crew's shouts turn from mockery to panic, the wind howling like a beast set free. The storm was here, faster than he'd feared, and he was trapped below while the Sea Raven sailed blind toward disaster. His father's words echoed in his mind, "When the sea turns, only those who listen survive." Jack's fingers tightened on the broom handle. He wasn't done yet. The hold was dark, but he knew every creak of this ship. There had to be a way out, a way to save them all, even the men who despised him. Would you risk everything to save a crew that hates you, or stay safe in the hold and let fate decide? Tell me in the comments. The storm is breaking, and Jack's trapped with the truth that could save the Sea Raven. Hit that subscribe button to see if he escapes in time, and click the video on the screen for another tale of courage against the odds. The Sea Raven screamed under the storm's fury, her timbers shuddering as waves towered over the deck like living giants, their foam-flecked crests crashing with the force of cannon fire. Jack Harrow, locked in the hold, felt the ship's agony in his bones, his bad leg throbbing as he clawed at the darkness for a way out. The crew's laughter had turned to shouts of panic above, their voices drowned by the wind's howl and the sea's roar. They'd mocked him, called him Crippled Jack, tossed his crutch into the abyss, but now the storm was here, and the reef from his father's chart loomed closer with every pitch of the ship. Jack's heart pounded, his father's words burning in his mind, "When the sea turns, only those who listen survive." He wasn't going to die in this hold, not while he knew how to save them. The air was thick with salt and fear, the hold's walls slick with spray that seeped through the hatch. Jack gripped Molly's broom-handle crutch, his fingers probing the wooden planks around him. A loose board, warped by years of damp, gave slightly under his touch. He wedged the broom handle into the gap, leveraging his weight despite the pain shooting through his leg. The board splintered with a crack, just loud enough to be swallowed by the storm's din. Jack squeezed through the narrow opening, emerging onto the lower deck, his clothes soaked, his father's notebook tucked inside his coat like a talisman. The ship lurched, throwing him against a barrel, but he pushed forward, driven by a fire he hadn't felt before. The crew might hate him, but he wouldn't let them drown. On deck, chaos reigned. Waves swept over the rails, tearing ropes free and sending barrels rolling like dice. The crew scrambled, their faces pale, their hands fumbling with knots they couldn't tie fast enough. Caleb Vance bellowed useless orders, his voice cracking as a sail tore loose, flapping like a wounded bird. Captain Elias Stone clung to the helm, his gray eyes wide with strain, fighting to keep the Sea Raven from spinning into the abyss. Jack staggered forward, the broom handle digging into his palm, his limp forgotten in the adrenaline's rush. He saw the reef in his mind's eye, jagged teeth waiting to rip the ship apart, and knew they had minutes, maybe less. "Captain?" Jack shouted, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "The reef's dead ahead. Drop the mainsail and hard starboard, or we're done." The crew froze, stunned to see the cripple on deck, let alone barking orders. Caleb's face twisted with rage. "You're out of the hold? I'll have you in chains for mutiny." But Elias raised a hand, silencing him, his eyes locking onto Jack's. "Speak, boy. What do you know?" Jack didn't hesitate. "My pa's chart marked a reef, 3 miles west. We're on it now. Drop the sails, turn the rudder, or we'll hit." His voice was steady, authoritative, carrying the weight of his father's lessons. Elias hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Do it," he roared. Jack turned to the crew, pointing at the tangled mainsail. "Cut those lines. Now." A young sailor, Tom, barely 18 with eyes wide as saucers, obeyed first, scrambling up the rigging with a knife. Others followed, their skepticism crumbling as Jack's commands rang out. "Secure the jib. Lash the barrels." He moved like a man possessed, his limp a distant ache, directing the crew with precision no one expected. He called out angles for the rudder, timing the waves to avoid the worst of their fury, his father's notebook alive in his mind, every sketch, every note guiding him like a map through hell. Caleb stood frozen, his fists clenched, watching the crew obey the man he'd mocked. Tom glanced at Jack, awe replacing fear in his eyes. "How's he know this?" he muttered to another sailor, who only shook his head. Elias, still at the helm, shouted, "Keep at it, Harrow! You're saving us." The ship groaned as she turned, narrowly skirting the reef's edge, the sound of grinding coral faint but chilling beneath the waves. Jack's heart raced. He'd done it, he'd pulled them back from the brink. But the storm wasn't done. A monstrous wave reared up, higher than the mast, its shadow swallowing the deck. Before anyone could react, it crashed down, splintering the rail and sweeping Caleb overboard with a scream that cut through the chaos. Jack froze, the crew's shouts fading as he stared at the spot where Caleb vanished. The man who'd tormented him, who'd locked him in the hold, was gone, swallowed by the sea's wrath. The crew scrambled, some grabbing ropes, others staring in horror. Elias yelled, "Man overboard! Get a line!" But the waves were relentless, and Caleb's head bobbed only once before sinking again. Jack's mind raced, his father's voice echoing, "The sea tests your soul, not just your skill." He could let Caleb drown, let the man who'd made his life hell pay the price. Or he could risk everything, his life, his pride, to save him. Would you save the man who made your life hell or let the sea take him? Tell me in the comments. The sea raven hangs by a thread, and Jack's next choice will decide his fate, and Caleb's. Hit that subscribe button to see what happens, and click the video on the screen for another epic tale of courage against the storm. The sea raven shuddered as the storm's fury began to ebb, her battered deck slick with salt and splintered wood, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and fear. Jack Harrow stood frozen, his makeshift crutch digging into the deck, staring at the churning sea where Caleb Vance had vanished beneath a monstrous wave. The crew's shouts echoed, panic, desperation, but Jack's mind was a storm of its own. Caleb, the first mate who'd mocked him, called him Cripple Jack, and locked him in the hold, was drowning. Jack's heart pounded, torn between justice and mercy. His father's words burned in his memory, "The sea tests your soul, not just your skill." He gripped the broom handle tighter, his bad leg trembling, and made his choice. He wouldn't let hate win, not today. Without a word, Jack snatched a coil of rope from a stunned sailor, tied it around his waist, and dove into the icy waves. The sea clawed at him, dragging at his twisted leg, but he fought through the pain, his eyes locked on the faint shadow of Caleb's form. The crew watched, breathless, as Jack reached him, wrapping the rope around Caleb's limp body. "Pull!" Jack shouted, his voice raw against the wind's howl. Tom, the young sailor, snapped into action, rallying others to haul the rope. The sea raven pitched, but the crew pulled as one, dragging Jack and Caleb back aboard. Caleb coughed, spitting seawater, his face pale but alive. Jack collapsed beside him, gasping, his legs screaming in agony. The crew stared, their mockery replaced by something new, respect or maybe fear. Captain Elias Stone knelt beside Jack, his gray eyes sharp but warm. "You're a damn fool, Harrow," he said, a rare smile cracking his stern face. "But you saved us all, and now this bastard too." Caleb, shivering and silent, met Jack's gaze for the first time without malice. He said nothing, but the weight of his stare spoke volumes, shame, gratitude, maybe both. The crew worked to secure the ship, their movements quicker now, guided by Jack's earlier commands. The storm was fading, the sky breaking into patches of bruised purple, but the Sea Raven was still afloat, her hull intact, the reef avoided. Jack's chest swelled with a quiet pride he hadn't felt before. He'd done what his father taught him, and it was enough. As the crew cleared debris, Elias pulled Jack aside, holding the soaked notebook Jack had carried through the storm. "This yours?" he asked, flipping it open. His eyes widened at the familiar handwriting. "Daniel Harrow. Your father?" Jack nodded, wary, expecting another lecture. Instead, Elias's voice softened. "I sailed with Daniel years ago. Best navigator I ever knew, until he was framed for a mutiny he didn't start. They ruined him, but he never stopped teaching you, did he?" Jack's throat tightened, the weight of his father's disgrace lifting like fog. "He taught me everything," Jack whispered. "That chart in the hold, it was his. Saved us from the reef." Elias handed the notebook back, his grip firm. "You're his son, all right. And you're twice the man he was." The revelation hit Jack like a wave. His father, Daniel Harrow, wasn't just a failed sailor but a legend betrayed, his knowledge hidden in a chart that saved them all. Jack's eyes stung, not from the salt but from pride and pain intertwined. Molly, the cook, approached, her weathered face soft with knowing. "I knew your pa, lad," she said quietly. "Kept his secret out of loyalty. He'd be proud of you today." Jack clutched the notebook, his father's legacy no longer a burden but a beacon. Caleb, now on his feet, limped over, his voice low. "I was wrong about you, Harrow. I'm sorry." The words were halting, raw but real. Jack nodded, too tired to hate, too relieved to care. But the sea wasn't done with them. A shout from Tom broke the moment, "Ship to starboard." All eyes turned to the horizon, where a black sail snapped against the fading storm clouds, its hull low and sleek. A pirate ship, drawn by the sea ravenous distress signals during the chaos. The crew's newfound unity faltered, fear creeping back into their faces. Elias cursed under his breath, gripping the helm. "They'll board us if we don't move fast." Jack's mind raced, his father's notebook still in his hand. He'd seen a trick in those pages, a hidden channel, a narrow path through shallows that could ground a heavier ship. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Jack stepped forward, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his bones. "Captain, I know a way. My pa's chart shows a channel east of here, too shallow for their ship, but we can make it. We lure them in, let the rocks do the rest." Elias studied him, then nodded. "You've earned my trust, Harrow. Let on." The crew looked to Jack, their eyes no longer mocking but expectant. Caleb, still shaken, clapped a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Do it, Jack. We're with you." The Sea Raven's sails snapped as she turned, the pirate ship closing fast, its cannons glinting in the dim light. Jack's plan was a gamble, and it needed every man's trust to work. Would you trust a man you once mocked to outwit pirates, or take your chances alone? Tell me in the comments. The Sea Raven faces a new threat, and Jack's daring plan could be their salvation, or their doom. Hit that subscribe button to see if they escape, and click the video on the screen for another tale of courage against impossible odds. The Sea Raven sliced through the dawn's glassy sea, her sails taut and her crew silent, every eye fixed on the black pirate ship gaining fast on their stern. Jack Harrow stood at the helm beside Captain Elias Stone, his father's chart spread across a crate, its inked lines a lifeline against the death snapping at their heels. The pirates' cannons glinted, their shouts carrying over the waves like a war drum's beat. Jack's bad leg ached, propped by Molly's broom-handle crutch, but his mind was sharp, alive with his father's lessons. The crew, once his tormentors, now looked to him. Cripple Jack *, the outcast who'd saved them from storm and reef. The hidden channel was their only hope, a narrow path through shallows that could ground the pirate ship. Jack's plan was bold, but one misstep would see them all dead. "Steady east, Captain," Jack said, his voice calm but firm, tracing the chart's faded lines. "The channel's tight, half a mile ahead. We draw them in, then cut hard to starboard." Elias nodded, his gray eyes locked on the horizon. "You sure about this, Harrow?" Jack met his gaze, the weight of his father's legacy in his hands. "I'm sure." The crew moved like a single beast, Tom hauling ropes, Caleb securing the jib, their trust in Jack unspoken but ironclad. The Sea Raven surged forward, her hull skimming the waves, the pirates' ship closing the gap, their black flag a promise of blood. Jack's heart pounded as he called out adjustments, his father's notebook open in his mind, every angle, every current memorized. The sea shallowed, its color shifting from deep blue to a treacherous green, rocks lurking just beneath. The pirates, greedy for their prize, followed blindly, their heavier ship plowing through waves the Sea Raven danced over. "Now!" Jack shouted. Elias spun the helm, the Sea Raven veering starboard with a groan, her keel grazing coral but holding true. The pirate ship wasn't so lucky. A sickening crunch split the air as their hull struck the shallows, timbers splintering, their sails collapsing like broken wings. The pirates' shouts turned to screams, their ship listing, trapped by the sea's hidden teeth. The Sea Raven sailed free, her crew erupting in cheers, fists raised against the dawn's golden light. Jack exhaled, his legs trembling as the adrenaline faded. Caleb clapped his shoulder, his once cruel face now lined with respect. "You did it, Harrow. We'd be dead without you." Tom grinned, tossing Jack a rope to tie off. "Ain't no cripple here, just Jack." Even Molly, watching from the galley door, gave a rare smile, her eyes bright with pride. Elias stepped forward, his voice carrying over the deck. "Harrow, you're this ship's navigator now. Permanent. Your pa would have been proud." Jack's throat tightened, his father's notebook heavy in his coat. He'd redeemed the Harrow name not just for himself but for the man who'd taught him to read the sea. Days later, the Sea Raven limped into a Caribbean port, her crew battered but alive, their unity forged in fire and water. Jack stood at the rail, watching palm trees sway against a sky painted gold and crimson. Caleb approached, holding a new crutch, carved from the ship's oak, smooth and sturdy, a far cry from the broom handle. "Made it myself," Caleb said, his voice gruff. "Figured you earned it." Jack took it, their eyes meeting, no words needed. The man who'd mocked him was now a friend, their past washed away by the storm. Molly joined them, her decision made. "I'm staying with this crew," she said. "Feels like family now." Jack nodded, knowing she saw her lost son in him, just as he saw his father in her quiet strength. Before leaving port, Jack made a pilgrimage to a small graveyard overlooking the sea, where his father's marker stood, weathered by salt and time. He knelt, placing the notebook beside the stone, its pages fluttering in the breeze. "I did it, Pa," he whispered. "For both of us." As he stood, a folded letter slipped from the notebook's back cover, its wax seal unbroken. Jack's hands shook as he opened it, his father's handwriting staring back. Asterisk, "Jack, if you're reading this, you've found the chart. They framed me, but I knew you'd prove them wrong. The sea's yours now. Make it sing." Asterisk. Jack's eyes stung, the final twist tying his past to his future. His father had known, had trusted him to carry on, leaving the chart to ensure his son's triumph. Back aboard the Sea Raven, Jack looked out at the endless sea, the new crutch steady under his arm, the crew's laughter echoing like a song. He was no longer the outcast, no longer crippled Jack. He was Jack Harrow, navigator, hero, son. The sea stretched before him, whispering of storms yet to come, of adventures waiting to test his grit. He was ready, his father's legacy alive in every beat of his heart. The Sea Raven sailed on, her crew a family forged by courage, their story a beacon for any soul daring to face the unknown. If you loved Jack's story, hit that subscribe button for more tales of courage and redemption. Would you sail with a crew like this or forge your own path? Tell me in the comments. Click the video on the screen for another epic adventure that'll leave you speechless.